implementing when trying to use the data for the municipalities of Denmark, because we do a lot of work in Copenhagen, and Copenhagen is divided into Holm and islands and whatnot. So each row of data has the label, so it always pops up several places. I also noticed with Ringkøbing on the west side of Jutland. So I went online on Friday and I tried to figure a way to solve it, and it seems to be the best way to do it is to sort them into a multi-polygon layer, so that so you change the data instead of changing the way that the labels are located.
You found the
and I'm not sure
solution.
I'm not sure I'm okay with that, so I'm going to look forward for something new. Like, it must be possible to do some advanced count, so if the label count is bigger than 1, it should be hidden or whatever, but maybe next time I come across it.
I can show you that now if you'd like.
Ooh, I'd like that very much.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be handy in a lot of places.
So why don't you stop sharing?
Yes.
And I will share my screen. And I'll bring up QGIS. I'll turn the. Let me turn on the Communa boundaries. Okay, there they are. Okay, so I have the Communa boundaries, municipalities labeled. And if I go to the layer styling panel here and I switch on to the labels tab, I have all of these tabs here for creating different settings, how the labels look. And if I go over, I believe it's on the right hand one, this rendering tab, there is, I'll move the zoom controls out of the way here. There we go. I checked this setting, only draw labels which fit completely within the feature. So if I uncheck this, you'll see all these tiny little labels, just as you were describing, because this, in most of these municipalities, have all these little islands, and each one of those will get a label. So it's single part. So, you know, we can, many of these municipalities probably have 20 or 30 features associated with them. So you get all these labels, which is kind of counterproductive. If we go down here to, Tollnbu, we can see you're getting all of those little islands labeled, and it gets a little messy. So we can fix that really easily just by going to this rendering tab in label properties and checking this box, only draw labels which fit completely within feature. And that takes care of most of it. You can also, instead of doing that, there's this option above, suppress labeling of features smaller than X. And so you can set a size in millimeters here. So I can set this, let's see, if I put 10 millimeters in there, it does the same thing. It strips away some of those labels. If I then zoom in where I can see some of those features, and then they're above that 10 millimeter threshold, and it's putting a label in those. If I reduce this to 5, now it's going to show more labels. So you can control the size of the polygon before it will, it'll actually label it for you. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes,
Yep.
Completely. But it is the millimeters, is it on the screen?
Yep.
Because if I wanted, I have issues with this before. So if I want to make a map like in the layout section, it doesn't necessarily look the same because the zoom level is not the same in
Yeah,
the
you may be
layout
making
as
a
it is on the
huge,
screen.
yeah, you may be making a huge poster size map, or you may be making a small,
Yeah,
A4 size map. So
yeah,
yeah, it will change. And so that's why usually my recommended workflow when you're making a map is first, yeah, figure out the scale that you're going to be working at. So how big of an area are you mapping? Is it just one, municipality boundary? And then what size sheet of paper, and kind of get that onto the sheet of paper, and figure out the scale of everything. And then you may need to adjust the labels after that so that they work with the size of the map you're making.
yeah. I did wish for a. Is it on the lines? There's a function that, so if they are connected if they're connected, they will be treated as one line.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
I wish for something like that for the polygon. So if the label was the same, it would only show up once, for instance. So it will. I can see that's a really big generator needed to do the labeling then, because it has to figure out if you have at least many thousands of polygons.
you can spend a lot of time on labeling, and you need to plan for that sometimes, because you can see all of the different ways you may want to configure the labels here with all these tabs. And like, for example, do you want to go to this tab, and do you want to set it so that the labels wrap when they hit a dash or a space? And do you want to put a text buffer around the labels? And do you need call outs for some of the labels? And how do you want them positioned? And so there's a lot of things to adjust with labels to get them to look right. So part of it is you need to plan on that, and set aside enough time so that you can do it well. But with this also, so I showed you this, on this rendering tab, we can control the labels pretty well. There's also an option here to limit the number of features to be labeled to. That doesn't work as well for me, but I'm sure there's a use case for that. But here you could say, I only want to label, 50 of the polygons.
Yeah.
And it kind of chooses for you.
But it chooses for you. You're not allowed to choose yourself.
No. So I think this
if there's something really important, then it might not be left out instead. So
yeah. And then formatting the data is the other strategy. So with Kamuna, for example, I can open up the attribute table for this layer, and I get all these attributes, and we've been working with municipality name here. Another option you have is simply going in and adding it. You could add a new field, for example, and I could just call this label and make it a text field. And then I could maybe I just select the big polygons, so I could, I don't know what size this one is. 1671. So I could go in here and I could select these by size. So I could say there's hectares. Greater than.
Can you select the top 10?
Yeah, you could do that just by with the table open. You could sort the table by any of these fields. So here's hectares, and if I left click on this, it will sort the data ascending and descending by the values in there, and I could select the top 10 by hectares right there. And then, for example, I could go down to my where's my label field that I added? Didn't I add a label field?
Yes, you did.
Let me try that again. That's strange.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's
because
supposed
it's already there. Yeah, but where is it? Okay, I've run into this before. Once in a while, you have to stop editing and save your edits, and now maybe it will show up. Wow, that's really strange. I do not see. There it is, right there. So why isn't it showing up here? Well, let me try the other way of calculating values. It's the field calculator. I'll try the field calculator and update an existing field. And I'm going to update label, and I'm going to put in the label field the municipality name. And since I have selected records, should only put these into the, it's going to update the 10 selected features here. So it's only going to put this name in the label field for the 10 selected records. So I click OK. So now I have this label field. And so a strategy I could use is, save my edits. And now instead of labeling it with Comuna noun, I can label them with the label field. So only those municipalities that have a value in that field will get a label now. So that's another strategy that you can use. Let me turn off some of this. So now we can see the top 10 Comuna in size are labeled. And then the other strategy is changing the data by creating, like you said, a multi-polygon. And that's not difficult either. If we go to the vector menu and geometry tools, we're looking for one called dissolve. Oh, is it analysis tools? Where's dissolve? Oh, it's under geoprocessing tools. So that tool there, dissolve, is the one that you would use to convert this municipality layer from single features to multi-polygon. So if I open up this dissolve tool and the input layer is Comuna, I can tell it that I want to dissolve by Comuna noun. So I can dissolve by, so any two polygons that have the same name will become one feature.
okay.
The output. So I'm just going to dissolve by that field and click run. So if I right click on Comuna, the original one, and show feature count, it has almost 1,600 features. If I right click on dissolve now, this one I just created, it has 99. So I just have one per Comuna. So if I went and used this as my layer for a map and labeled it, it's much easier because I'm just going to have one label for every Comuna. So sometimes you have to do some processing when you're making a map, because everything we're doing is based on the data. And sometimes the data doesn't really work for what you're trying to do. So it's pretty common for people to dissolve a layer like that so that they get one per municipality in this place, and they can use that for labeling or whatever else they're doing. So I could right click on this and go to styles, copy style, and right click on this new one and go style, paste style. So I don't have to redo everything. I still have the same.
Oh, it's looking for.
Yeah, it's looking for a field, but
no, it's looking for the label, which there are only 10 of.
Yeah, so I'll just change it back to now, and I probably have that other setting in here. So now they're all labeled. So that's that. The other thing, you had wondered about this layer of train stations where we had this categorical render for train stations where we gave a different symbol for S-tow versus locale tow versus metro. And as you know, some stations are used for more than one system, like Norport. We can see that right here. We can see there's it's both a metro stop and an S-tow stop, and the symbols are colliding with each other. And we wondered if we could use the point displacement renderer with this, and we can. So here I can simply, I tried this, I can simply change this to, now that I have it set up this way, to point displacement. It'll keep all the same symbols, but let me go in and set the displacement value so that I can separate those and actually see the different icons for the different systems that they're in. So if I choose point displacement.
You need to set it up before you go to point displacement?
Correct.
Okay. And if you don't like the point displacement, can you go back and it will stay the same?
Yeah, I think I can go back. Yeah, just go down here. This is undo, redo.
Oh yes, of course.
So I can just undo and it will go right back. So if you decide you don't want to do it, you can go back. But here with point displacement, you're seeing it, the little ring, it's separating these two now. Before they were stacked. And then it's just a matter of going through and changing the rendering setting. So you could get rid of this ring by just giving it 0 thickness so we don't see it anymore. And again, the center symbol, we might want to just make this 0 size or make it transparent so it's not there. And so now we're seeing both of those stations. We can, change the settings here to see how it changes things. We can choose ring or concentric rings or grid, and we'll get slightly different looks depending on where we're looking at the map and what we're zoomed into. But now as we zoom out, it's still going to try to force those apart so that we can see them. And so depending on what scale we're looking at, we're going to have to go in and change the settings here to make it separate them enough, but it will work. And Jesper, you had another question last week about labeling pixels. And it's not really something you do with raster data. But if you really wanted to have a label on a map of every pixel value, you can use this tool in the processing toolbox. If I search for pixel, there's one for raster pixels to points. So this would basically create a point layer where there's a point at the center of every pixel. Then you could give that new point layer no symbols. So for that point layer, you would choose the no symbols renderer up here. So there was no point there, and then just label it with the value, and you'd have labels show up on the map. But the problem you're going to run into is that there are a lot of pixels here. So you'd never be able to label it at this scale, because if I go into the properties of this raster layer and go to the information tab, the dimensions are 12,000 pixels by almost 8,000 pixels. So that means going east to west, it's 12,000 pixels wide, and north-south, it's almost 8,000 pixels wide. So there's a lot. So you're going to have that many points. And so it would only work if you're really zoomed in. If you zoom into a tiny area where you can start to almost see the pixels anyway, then it would work. I need to change my sampling back to nearest neighbor, so I can, so see now I'm zoomed in so I can kind of see the pixels. And I'm at a scale of 1 to 50 to be able to see that. So here you could actually have a little label in there. But it's really not, and it's not, you know, an easy thing to do. And
so one would probably be better off creating a point layer and store the labels in.
correct. Yeah. So you can use this raster pixels to points and create that series of points. But you know, it would have, what is 8,000 times 12,000? It's a big number. Yeah, you're going to have 96 million points just from this raster.
and 96 million labels.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
All going out many decimal places. So it's not very practical to try to do that. It's better if you want to know specific values to use the identify features tool and just click and you can see the value like this. So that's what I recommend. But I wanted to let you know it is possible, but maybe not desirable.
Thank you very much.
So what I thought I'd do for the rest of the time, I mean, we can keep playing in the sandbox here, but I have a presentation I gave to the Danish QGIS user group about some of the new symbology features in the last couple of releases of QGIS. I thought I might show you that so you kind of see some of the new additions to QGIS in the last year or so. Does that sound interesting? And maybe we don't look at every single slide necessarily, but I can show you. So this covered version 3.2.2 and 3.2.4, and actually has a couple slides on 3.2.6. So these are all versions that came out in the last year. And I have to move the zoom out of here. So one is when you have a base map like this scam court from Data for Suning or something from Quick Map Services, you'll see in the layer styling panel, there's this little option now to invert the colors. So this is an easy way to create a dark background map from a light background map, for example. It'll just invert the colors, and so you get this different look just by clicking that. So that's kind of a nice tool. Sometimes you want to, you know, quickly have a different looking base map than the one that you have, and so you can use that to do that. Some of these are new settings for tools that already existed. So this has to do for label buffers. So label buffers are just the little halos, you know, around that you can put around label text. And we have different units that we can put those in. So now there's an option to set them as a percentage of basically the font size, so that as you zoom in and zoom out or have different size text, the ratio of the label buffer to the font stays the same. So in this list of units, one of the new ones here is percentage for the size of that buffer. So now as I change the font size, that buffer stays relatively the same size to the font. So just a little tiny detail there. I talked to you about annotation layers. And so these, again, these are kind of designed to just make it easy for people to mark up a map. So like in your office, maybe you're looking at some data and you want to point out something to your your boss or a customer or something like that that you noticed in the data. Or maybe you're making a map and you don't have any data for this one little feature that you want to add, so you can use these annotation layers to add that kind of extra text or points, lines, and polygons to the map. And they'll just be these little annotations, which means they're just basically graphics that are stored in the project. And they aren't actually GIS layers. So that's the philosophy behind annotation layers. They're still geo-referenced. So as you pan and move the map or zoom in and out, they're going to scale like an ordinary GIS layer will. And they're locked into place where you've drawn them. They are going to be sitting. If you put an arrow on the map, it's going to stay there, even if you zoom in or zoom out or pan the map east or west. That arrow is going to stay in the position you placed it in. So here with the annotation layers, the very first annotation, if you create one by default, will be just a new annotation layer that is stored here, and it won't actually be exposed in the layers panel. But from the annotations menu, you can choose to create a new annotation layer instead, so that it does show up as a separate layer, which I think is the better idea. So if you don't pay attention, you just start clicking on the annotations tool and drawing things, it'll be just this default project-based annotation. But you can also click this little drop down here and choose new annotation layer. And at that point, it will show up in the layers panel and you can turn it on and turn it off and things like that. And so other than that, the annotations, they can be points, they can be lines, they can be polygons, and you can use any of the symbology tools in QGIS on them. So you can do all kinds of things with them. So they're just handy and quick. Let's see. Oh yeah, I think this was, let me go through with this. So here I'm using that option to create a new annotation layer here called annotations in the layers panel. And then I'm going to digitize into that and start adding a point or adding a polygon to the map. There's a little area. And here, since it's an annotation in the layers panel, that means I can move it up and down in the layer order in the layers panel. And it will, if I move it underneath something like the cycle routes or the municipality boundaries or the base map, it will, change its drawing order like any other GIS layer. So that's annotations.
Is it exportable?
Not
Is the attribute table supporting the label features?
No, well, it's not. There is no attribute table. First off,
okay.
Get rid of this little news item here. Please go away. Thank you. So in the processing toolbox, the developer of these is starting to add some tools. I think in cartography. So if you do happen to create an annotation and you don't pay attention and you just create it in that default annotations layer, you can transfer it to one that will sit in the layers panel using this tool. And I think that's the only tool in here now, but the developer has a wish list of things that he wants to add, which would be the ability to export these out as a GIS layer at some point. So it will probably, that functionality will probably appear in the next year at some point, but it's not there now. Right now, they are simply ways to mark up the map and they're stored in the project and you can't do anything with them other than that. So if you need it to be GIS data, it's better to just create some GIS data. But if you need a quick way to mark up the map with something that you don't have data for, then you can use annotations.
I'm only asking because I sometimes demands change, or sometimes you get an assignment of something, it just needs to be blah blah something something, and then along the way it turns out that it's not going to be blah blah something something, but it's actually something that we need to use in some other way. So that was just my so we can expect this to be in a future version of QGIS.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, well, they're there now, but the ability to export them to GIS layers
yes,
will
yes.
be. You have access to everything that you're seeing here right now, but the annotation toolbar probably is not. I don't believe it's turned on by default. So you can turn on different toolbars by going to the View menu, down to Toolbars, and then here's the Annotations toolbar. So you can, if it's not turned on, you can just go to the View menu and turn it on, and then you'll have it right here. So yeah, another feature in the Style Manager, you can resize the icons now with this little slider. That was a new feature added at 3.2.4. If you don't work with raster data, you may not use color ramps that often, but you can create new color ramps, and you can also this one's a very specific, but you can use these. There's a different color model selector now in the color ramp builder, and it changes the way the color ramp looks. So sometimes you may just experiment with that. So let me, yeah, so here it's RGB, and you can look at the color ramp, and if I change it to HSV, you can see it looks different. So you may want to experiment with that, or just know that it's there. Again, this is a very specific tool that you probably don't use very often, but it was a new feature. I think I showed this early on, that there are several new symbol layer types. So I have some examples of these specific symbol layer types in the next couple slides. So this is this line burst symbol layer type. So this is kind of like a shape burst fill, but for lines. So you can basically, for a line, here I'm using the outline of a building, and I'm using the line burst shape burst fill for this line. So if I have this, line, I can symbolize it with this shape burst fill from dark blue to white, for example, here. So if you want to style lines in that way, line burst could be really interesting. I'll play this again. So again, it's like shape burst, but for lines. So you can choose color ramps or two different colors, either one of these methods here, and then work with the width of the line, and it will go ahead and do that. And then here I'm changing the join style from miter to round to buffer, so you get different ways that it changes at the corner.
So it works on lines as well?
It only works on lines.
No, I mean on a line layer?
Yeah. So I can go into, whoops, let me bring up QGIS here. So I can turn on, let me turn on roads. So here I have roads turned on, and I'm going to make them a thicker line so we can see them. Wrong way. There we go. So there's roads. So I can change these to be a line burst. And then I could change to, let's say, a color ramp. Let's go crazy. We'll make them spectral, and then increase the width. And now I have my roads looking like that. So you could use any of the color ramps here.
I'm sorry, Kurt, but that looks awful.
It does, yeah.
But perhaps it could be used to smoothen out rivers, for instances.
Yeah,
for instance,
possible. Yep. Yeah, that does look awful, but I just wanted to show you that it's there. So another interesting new symbol layer type is this raster line symbol marker. So here we're looking at some hiking trails, and here I'm choosing the raster line marker, and I'll have a little bitmap of footprints. And so I can use these footprints, this little bitmap I found, to make a nice symbol for the path with little footprints along it. So it's kind of intuitive. So this allows you to use any image along a line. So you may have a use for that, you may not, but it's a new symbol layer type. There's settings for all of these different symbol layer types. So these are all symbol layer types that existed already, and we looked at point pattern fill, I know, for forests, and we looked at marker line a little bit, and now there's just a lot of settings here. So some of the settings that we used with marker line when we were looking at label callouts the other day are new, where we have all these settings for marker lines where the little marker appears here. So this gives you full control on where you'd want that marker along a line. So that can be quite useful, I think, especially if you're working on different kinds of pipes and things like that, where you can give different icons at different parts of the pipe, the beginning, the end, the middle. This one's a little specific. There's this line pattern fill, which is one way to give a crosshatch like this to a polygon. And there's now this clipping setting here that allows you to change how that is how that symbol is clipped to the polygon, either to the polygon edge or extending beyond, or just to one side. So yeah, that one's a little archaic, but let's see. This one's kind of interesting. We used point pattern fill. We used this with forests. And so we had SVG icons for trees. Here we're using the Danish flag icon and as a raster marker. And there's this alignment setting. So here, when I have it set to the default of align to feature, at the first, they get cut off at the municipality boundaries. But if I change that to align to map extent, which I'm going to do now, it basically dissolves the feature in the way it's being symbolized, so that you get this like smooth raster markers across the whole area. So again, just a very specific little setting that's new. Some of the things I showed you with point pattern fills for forests are new. Like, so that we actually used a new feature. This the angle setting and these randomized pattern settings that we played with are all new as of 3.2.4. So that was all introduced, late last summer when 3.2.4 came out. So some of the settings we used last week in class are only a year old or so to randomize the trees. So this goes into, I'm going to give you a slide on the next class I would recommend if you're kind of into this symbology in QGIS is my data visualization class. And I cover in that class how you can go a little bit further and use these expressions to create different symbols. So here's an example of using an expression that's new in QGIS to create this thing called a cartogram. So here, a cartogram is where you change the size of a polygon based on a data value. So here, we're making a map of population density. So when we're changing the size of the municipality by the population density using this big expression, which is, we don't have to worry about why that works. But there's a new function called scale that allows this to be done, so that Owense has, is almost the full size of the municipality because it has a high population density. But some of these are are shrunk because they don't have a high population density. So this is another type of map called a cartogram that's very specific. And so it's an example of using this new function. You recognize some of the coastal vignette inverted polygon shape burst fill in this map, though. We learned how to do that last week for the sea there. There's also these new wave functions. So these wave functions will again allow you to use a little expression to change how wavy a line is. So I just drew some lines along the coast here, and I can change the wave height and the amplitude and change the way that the wave occurs on that line. And there's a lot of these functions. There's wave, there's wave randomized, square wave randomized, triangular wave, and triangular wave randomized. So any kind of wavy line that you'd ever want to make, you can make now. And then with print layouts, something that's nice now, this map you're familiar with, if we put a title on there and the title is kind of hard to read, and we have, with all the text on the layout, you now have the same tabs here for text in a print layout that you have with labels. And so you can use that to add a halo around the text or a drop shadow and things like that. So that's all new for the print layout, which is quite nice. And we didn't look at 3D. This is something I worked with in the data visualization class, but QGIS has a 3D viewer. And the 3D viewer has gotten a lot of attention in the last year. So there's a lot of new features in the way you can navigate in a 3D view. And there's now a 3D views manager. So just like in QGIS, when you create a print layout, there's a print layout manager. There's a 3D views manager where you can have multiple saved 3D views in a project and give them different names and things like that. And with 3D, you can even make 3D maps of vector data. So you could extrude the communa boundaries into 3D based on the total population, for example, to show things like that. This is one example of using that animated marker. So there's another symbol layer type called animated marker. So if you can find an animated GIF that works for a map, you can put it on there. So this is lightning data, and I found a lightning GIF. And so you can symbolize that in QGIS now with a lightning GIF. It's the only thing I could think of where it would really make sense to use this. And then have either of you ever worked with point cloud data before? Point clouds are, LiDAR is, and it's really how some of that elevation data we worked with is collected. So QGIS now supports point clouds, and also you can bring the point cloud into 3D, and there's some new nice ways of working with point clouds in 3D. So just so you know, that's possible. So that some of that was a little more than you may ever work with, which is fine, but at least you know it's there. One thing I wanted to show you though with labels in the last couple of minutes here. So let's say, we're making a map of these train stations. So we go and we create a new print layout. And I add my map to the sheet of paper. So I get my map of train stations. And let's say then that I add a title up here and give my map a title, and I give it a bigger font so we can see it. So there's my title on my map. But what happens here is that my, oh, I don't have label. No, I need something where I have labels. Use this. There we go. Bring up the map again, refresh. Okay, so I have now a title on here, and maybe I want the title sitting over here, but the title is now interfering with these labels for these two municipalities. And, you know, so you might think, well, yeah, you could simply put it over the C, which is true. But regardless of what you might want to do, I'm going to show you a nice feature. This is just a quick thing, so it's not a great example, but so I have my title here. If I then select my map and I look at item properties over here for my map, there's a little label settings tab here on my map properties. And if I click on that, I can choose label blocking items. So I can say, okay, I want my title to be a label blocking item, which means the labels are going to get out of the way of the title when I check this box. So watch the map where it says my beautiful map. I'll check this box. Now those labels are going to move. And wherever I move this title, the labels are going to move to get out of the way of the map title. You can see. So this is one nice way of being able to control things really easily on a final map. You can have something like a legend here or anything else, and you can set anything in your map to be a label blocking item so that they will the labels will try to avoid that item on the map. So that's a really practical, nice little feature, which is also fairly new. Sometime in the last year this was added. And it makes kind of final map composition really easy because you can just set everything to be a label blocking item, and you can be sure that you won't have any awkward situations where labels are, you know, half visible on the map or something. Because otherwise it's really easy to have a situation where you have your legend and it's covering half of a label. And if we go back here and set that to be a label blocking item, that label is going to move to get out of the way. So I really like that feature quite a bit. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is data visualization with QGIS is coming up in June. So it's going to be June 6th to June 20th. This is another online class. It's a little longer than this Symbology one has been. This is going to run from, the first session will be 2 hours long on June 6th. Then again, the following week we'll have a question and answer session for an hour. And then there'll be a second session, another 2-hour session on the 15th of June, and then a final 1-hour follow-up session to answer any questions. And so it's 6 hours in total, including the follow-up sessions. And you'll learn a lot more detail about using some of the things that you've been introduced to here, especially blending modes and how to use layer effects like the drop shadows and outer glows in specific ways. Like you'll learn some practical specific use cases for doing those kinds of things. You'll also learn how to do some more sophisticated symbology using expressions. You'll learn how to use the temporal controller, which is, if you have any kind of time-based data, this lets you create an animation through time, like an MP4 that shows the map change through time, like maybe the year that buildings were constructed in a town. You can visualize that in an animation through time. You'll also learn how to work with the 3D viewer. So you'll get a much more thorough understanding of how to do some of the use some of the other more sophisticated data visualization tools that QGIS has. So if you're interested in that, you can register. I'll put this link in the chat. And so yeah, that's what I had to show you today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yes. The geometry generator, what question? That's
Yeah.
always, you always have to use code for that, or not?
Yeah, but it's not necessarily difficult to do some things with it. I can show you, for example, a quick introduction to that. I'll share my screen and bring up this QGIS project. So let's say, for example, here with municipalities, let's say we wanted to show municipalities just the centroid of the municipality. So I can take this, let's see, let me use this one. So I can take this layer and go into the layer styling panel and change this to a symbol layer type of geometry generator. So it's just another one in this list. And then down here, geometry is the geometry of every one of the municipalities. But I can also change the geometry type, so I can render these polygons, for example, as points or lines. So if I choose point, there is a function in QGIS called centroid. So I can use this centroid function and just pass that function the geometry. And now I'm showing the comunas as centroid points for each one. So it's kind of interesting. So I have a polygon layer, I'm showing it as points. So you can do a lot of pretty interesting things with that.
But so what does the centroid function do? Does it put it in the middle of the geometry? Okay.
Yep. So if you had a square pixel, the centroid would be the very center.
Yeah. So again, it's up to the data to decide where the point is, if it's good or not.
Well, yeah, it will be the centroid of it. But it's up to the data. It's up to you and your data if that particular thing would be useful to you or not. But yeah. But it's kind of nice because sometimes instead of having to process the data, you can just render it in a way that you need it to be without having to run a processing tool and create another layer.
Yeah.
So whenever you can avoid creating a new layer, that's a win.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Do you have time to show the inverted polygon burst on the Kommune layer?
Yeah, I sure do.
It was the Frederiksberg got turned into a lake last time.
Yeah, I don't know why that happened, but I can tell you that
it also happened to me.
Yeah, that community data is leaves a little to be desired. It has some geometry problems with it, which I think is what's going on there. Let me try, maybe I'll try it on the dissolved one and see if the dissolved one. Yeah, it's an island. Yeah. Well, anyway, so what we do is we go in here and we choose the inverted polygon renderer. And yeah, it's because it's an island.
Is it
It's,
because
yeah, it's because
the polygons are see-through?
I think what's going on is must be because when it
It's kind of unusual, but there's a hole in Copenhagen.
Yeah, when it inverts this polygon, Frederiksberg is the inverse of this polygon, Copenhagen. I think that's what it is. So this is just not a great use case. You could, for example, it would be better, you could just go to use that same dissolve tool and not list any fields. And it will dissolve all the municipalities into just one polygon. And then you could use that with inverted polygon shape burst fills and get the effect you want. So for now, we'll just ignore Frederiksberg, but we can go in here and we can use the inverted polygon renderer. And then for the symbol layer type,
no, but good, it's okay. I was just wondering about the Frederiksberg thing because maybe perhaps it could be used with the advanced layers, but since they don't have a color, then that won't be any use either.
Right. Yeah, that's, I think just because it's an island in it, so it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Okay, but thank you for trying.
Yep. That's just the data issue. That's nothing we can do about that. It's one of the things where QGIS is doing exactly what we're telling it to, but it just happens to have an island in it. And
don't do what I tell you to. Do what I want.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, great. If you run into any issues in your assignment, just let me know. And I look forward to seeing what you do. And yeah.
Yep.
I'll send you a recording of this session as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. See you.
Bye.
Bye.